No matter how many times you fall, the only thing that matters is how you rise back up. Witness the incredible strength of the human spirit in our latest collection of cinematic stories about hope and renewal. Subscribe now and rise with us in every new episode.
I pressed the phone against my ear and listened to the silence on the other end of the line. My daughter had forgotten to hang up. I could hear her laughing, that bright, easy laugh I had spent 63 years learning to love. And then I heard the other voice. Low, clipped, certain of itself. She doesn't need to be in the photos. Honestly, Renee, the less visible she is, the better the album will look. I stood very still in my kitchen, the kind of still that comes not from peace, but from the body understanding something before the mind catches up. My name is Dolores. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a school principal in Baltimore, Maryland. I raised 2 children alone after my husband Charles passed from a stroke when my son was 9 and my daughter was 6. I paid every bill, attended every recital, drove every carpool, and held every hand through every hard night this family has ever seen. I say this not to ask for a medal. I say it so you understand exactly who is standing in that kitchen, holding that phone, listening to her daughter agree. You're right, my daughter said. She kind of overdresses anyway. She'll stand out. I set the phone down on the counter very gently. I did not cry. Not yet. I looked out the window at the rose bushes Charles planted the year we bought this house, the ones I had tended alone for 24 years, and I made myself breathe. Then I picked the phone back up and waited. Mom? Sorry, I think I butt dialed you. Were you there long? I just picked up, I said. Okay, good. I'll call you later. Love you too, baby. I hung up. I went to the stove and turned off the soup I had been making. Her favorite, the chicken and white beans she always asked for when she came home. I put the lid on the pot and turned off the burner and stood there in my quiet kitchen for a long time. You want to know how a mother decides to let go of the version of her child she thought she knew? It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in a single moment, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, when the soup is still warm and the roses are still blooming and the person you gave your whole life to forgets you're on the line. Let me start from the beginning. My daughter Renee is 34 years old. She is beautiful in the way I always hoped she would be. Not just in her face, but in the way she walks into a room like she belongs there. She got that from Charles. She got her stubbornness from me. For most of her life, those 2 things together made her extraordinary. She finished her MBA at 30. She ran half marathons. She called me every Sunday without fail, even when she was traveling, even when the calls were short. She was my closest friend in the way that only a daughter can be. She met her fiancé Marcus 2 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. He was kind, soft-spoken, the kind of man who stands up when an older woman enters the room. I liked him immediately. I told Renee on the drive home from their first dinner together that I thought he was a good man. She glowed when I said it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. What I did not account for was his mother. Her name is Patricia. She is, by all outward appearances, a perfectly pleasant woman. She hosts a monthly supper club in her Bethesda townhouse. She volunteers at her church. She wears silk blouses and speaks in that careful, measured way that makes everything sound like a compliment, even when it isn't. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down with a smile fixed on her face and said, Dolores, what a warm presence you have. You remind me of my housekeeper. She's just the loveliest woman. I smiled back. I filed it away. Over the following months, I watched. Patricia had a gift for making herself essential. She inserted herself into the wedding planning slowly, the way water finds its way through a foundation crack. Patient, persistent, invisible until the damage is already done. She had opinions about the florist, the venue, the menu. She had opinions, it turned out, about me. The first sign I did not take seriously enough was the seating chart conversation. Renee called me in October to talk through the table arrangements. She mentioned, almost in passing, that Patricia had suggested putting my side of the family toward the back, near the garden doors, so they have more room. My side of the family is me, my son Deshaun, his wife and their 3 kids, my sister Gloria, and a handful of cousins. We are not a crowd that requires crowd management. I said nothing at the time. I thought it was a one-time overreach. The second sign was the engagement photos. Marcus and Renee did a family photo session in November. I drove 2.5 hours to be there. Patricia arrived with a photographer she had hired separately, just to capture some candids, she said, and spent the afternoon gently repositioning people. By the end of the session, I was standing at the edge of every frame. In one photo, I am almost entirely behind a decorative pillar. I assumed it was accidental. I did not assume for long. The third sign was Thanksgiving. Renee spent Thanksgiving with Marcus's family that year. This was new. We had a tradition, 20-something years of it, of Thanksgiving at my house. Sweet potato pie from scratch, Charles's mother's cornbread recipe. My sister Gloria coming down from Philadelphia with her green bean casserole that nobody liked but everybody ate. That year, Renee called me the week before and said Patricia had already planned a big dinner and it would hurt Marcus's feelings if they didn't go. I told her I understood. I made the sweet potato pie anyway and ate it with Deshawn's kids, and I told myself this was just the natural shift that comes when children build their own families. I told myself a lot of things that year. After the phone call, the one where I heard everything, I did not call Renee back. I did not call Patricia. I did not say a single word to anyone about what I had heard. Instead, I did 3 things. The first thing I did was make a list. I settled in my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I wrote down every financial contribution I had made to this wedding. The deposit on the venue, $12,000, wired in August. The catering upgrade Renee had asked for in September because Patricia's guest list was larger than originally planned, $4,000. The custom invitations Patricia had selected, the ones with the gold foil and the hand-lettered calligraphy that Renee said she loved, $1,800. The honeymoon contribution I had offered at Christmas, placed in an envelope with a card that said, "For wherever you two decide to begin, $5,000. I added it up. I sat with a number for a while. The second thing I did was call my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she has handled my affairs for 15 years. I did not call her in a panic. I called her the way I have always called her, to think clearly about something important. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I have kept her for 15 years. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. The first was whether any of the money had been given as a formal gift, or as a contribution with an understanding of conditions. The second was whether I had documentation. I told her I had wire transfer records, email threads, and a folder on my computer that I had been maintaining without fully understanding why. "Dolores," Sandra said, "I think part of you knew this was coming." I didn't answer that. But I didn't disagree either. The third thing I did was wait. I have learned in 63 years that the most powerful thing a woman can do is act from stillness rather than from pain. Pain makes you loud. Stillness makes you precise. I waited 4 days. I went to work. I watered the roses. I returned Renee's Sunday call as though nothing had happened, and listened to her talk about the centerpiece options for 20 minutes without a single change in my voice. On the 5th day, Renee called me on a Tuesday evening and asked if I could increase my contribution to cover the rehearsal dinner. Patricia had suggested a restaurant that was a step above the one originally planned, and Marcus really wanted it. The cost difference was $3,500. I told her I would think about it and call her back. I called Sandra instead. When I called Renee back that evening, I was calm. I want you to understand that. I was not cold. I was not angry. I was not performing composure. I was genuinely, deeply calm, the way you become calm when you have already accepted something and are simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "I'd been doing some thinking," I told her. "Okay," she said, a small hesitation in her voice. She had known me long enough to hear the quality of my silence. "I want to talk to you about the wedding budget, and about a few other things. Can you come by this Saturday?" She came on Saturday. She came on loan, which told me she understood this was not a casual visit. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made my list, where I had eaten dinners with her and Deshawn for 20 years, and she folded her hands in front of her and looked at me with something that might have been guilt or might have been preparation. I brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "I love you," I said. "I want you to know that's not in question. Not now, not ever." She nodded. Her jaw was tight. "I also want you to know that I heard your conversation with Patricia, the one about the photos." The color shifted in her face. Not a blush, not a flush, something deeper. Recognition. "Mom." "Let me finish, baby." I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here because I think we've been talking around something for a long time and I'd rather say it plainly. She was quiet. Patricia has been working very methodically to reduce my place in this wedding and in your life. And I have watched you let her. I don't think you've been cruel. I think you've been tired, and you've been trying to keep the peace. And you've been choosing the path of least resistance without fully thinking about where that path leads. But I need you to understand that there is a difference between keeping the peace and erasing your mother. She looked down at her coffee. The photos comment wasn't the first thing I said. The Thanksgiving was not the first thing. The seating chart was not the first thing. The seating chart was not the first thing. I've been watching this happen piece by piece, and I have been patient because I know that building a life with someone means adjusting to their family. But there is a line, Renee, and your future mother-in-law asked you to agree that I should be invisible in your wedding album, and you said yes. When she looked up, she was crying. Not the quick, strategic tears that come from being caught. Real tears. The kind that come from knowing you've done something you cannot undo. I didn't think about it, she said. She makes everything so hard when I push back, and I thought it was just pictures. It's not just pictures. I know. It's never just one thing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What do you want me to do? I want you to make a decision, I said. Not for me, for yourself, about what kind of woman you want to be and what kind of marriage you want to build. Because a marriage that starts with agreeing to make your mother invisible is telling you something about how that marriage will go. She sat with that for a long time. I let her. Then I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was not a list of demands. It was not an ultimatum. It was a single page that Sandra had prepared, outlining the contributions I had made to the wedding and noting that, in light of recent developments, I would be withdrawing my financial participation until I had clarity about my role in the event and in my daughter's life going forward. Renee stared at the paper. You're pulling your money? I'm pausing it. I said, there's a difference. Mom, the venue deposit is already paid. I'm not asking for it back. I'm telling you that the additional $4,800 I was prepared to contribute, the rehearsal dinner upgrade, the floral additions, those are paused, until we have an honest conversation about what's happening here. She was quiet for a long time. Patricia is going to... I know what Patricia is going to do, I said gently. That's not my concern right now. My concern is you. Renee left that afternoon without any resolution. She drove back to her apartment, and I went back to my roses and my quiet and my legal pad. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel righteous. I felt the particular grief of a mother who loves her child enough to risk the relationship rather than lose herself entirely. What happened next, I did not expect. Marcus called me. He called the following Monday in the evening and asked if he could come by. He came alone. He sat at the same table where his fiancée had sat 2 days before, and he looked at me with an expression I recognized, the expression of a man who has been doing his own thinking. I need to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. How long has my mother been doing this? I looked at him. He was serious. His hands were still on the table and he was looking directly at me without flinching. Since the engagement photos, I said, that I can document. But I suspect before that. He nodded slowly. Renee told me about your conversation. She told me everything. He paused. I didn't know about the photo comment. She didn't tell me that one. I figured she hadn't. My mother does this, he said quietly. She did it with my brother's wife. They live in Phoenix now. They moved there 2 years ago. He looked down at the table. I thought because she's strong, I thought it would be different. Marcus, I said, your mother is not the problem I'm asking you to solve. The problem I'm asking you to solve is the pattern. What happens in your house when your mother pushes? Who gives? Every time, who gives? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We talked for 2 hours that evening. I made tea. I told him about Charles, about what it meant to build a life with someone who had complicated family attachments, about the specific loneliness of being the person who always absorbs rather than the person who sets the terms. He listened the way young men listen when they're genuinely trying to learn something rather than just waiting to respond. Before he left, he said, I'm going to fix this. I believe you, I said. But fixing it doesn't mean fighting your mother. It means deciding, with Renee, what your family will look like, and then holding that line together, every time. He nodded. And Marcus? I said. He turned at the door. Your mother is not a villain. She loves you. She's just been allowed to love you without limits for a very long time, and that's a hard habit to break. Be patient with her. But don't mistake patience for permission. He drove away into the dark, and I stood at the screen door and watched his taillights disappear down the street. The weeks that followed were not smooth. Nothing real ever is. Patricia called Renee twice to push back about the rehearsal dinner venue. Renee held the line both times. The second call, from what Renee told me, lasted 40 minutes and ended with Patricia saying she felt marginalized in the planning process. Renee told her, very calmly, that the planning process was going to reflect both families equally, and that if that felt like marginalization, they probably needed to reset their expectations together before the wedding. I cannot tell you how proud I was when she told me that. I restored my financial contribution 3 weeks before the wedding. Not all of it. I covered the rehearsal dinner at the original venue, the one Renee and Marcus had chosen before the upgrade suggestion, and I contributed to the floral arrangements that Renee herself had picked out, not the ones Patricia had lobbied for. I sent Renee a card with the transfer confirmation that said only, "This is for your wedding, not anyone else's idea of it. I love you." The seating chart was redone. My family sat in the third row from the front on the aisle. My sister Gloria cried through the entire ceremony and gave a toast at the reception that made the whole room laugh and then cry, in that order, which is the only way a toast should go. I was in the photos. Every single one. In the formal family portrait, I stood next to my daughter in my emerald green dress. Yes, I overdress. I have always overdressed. I was raised to show up, and I smiled the way a woman smiles when she knows exactly who she is and has decided that will be enough. Patricia stood on the other side of Marcus. She was polite to me all day. Cool, but polite. I was polite back. I did not need her to like me. I did not need her to understand what had happened in the preceding months, or to acknowledge the ways she had tried to shrink me. I only needed one thing from that day, and I got it. At the end of the night, when the dancing had slowed and the cake had been cut and the guests were gathering their things, Renee found me at the edge of the room. She wrapped both arms around me and put her head on my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small, and she said, "Thank you for not letting me get away with it." I held her for a long time. "Baby," I said. "That's the job." I drove home alone that night through the quiet Baltimore streets, past the school where I had spent 31 years, past the church where Charles and I got married, past the hardware store where I'd once bought the soil for the roses. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a minute before going inside. I thought about what I almost let happen, how close I came to being the woman who swallowed it, the seating, the photos, the Thanksgiving, the erasure, in the name of keeping the peace. How many women do exactly that, every single day? Because the people they love most require it of them. How the world is full of mothers who spent decades building something and then spent the next decade quietly disappearing from it, because no one told them they were allowed to hold their ground. I thought about Charles, about what he used to say when I was preparing for a difficult conversation with a difficult parent or a difficult school board member or a difficult anyone. He would put both hands on my shoulders and look at me and say, "Dolores, you've never needed permission to be yourself. Stop waiting for someone to give it to you." I got out of the car. I walked up the path past Charles's roses, still blooming even this late in the season, and I unlocked the front door and went inside. The kitchen was clean and quiet. The legal pad was still on the table, the list still written on it in my handwriting. I picked it up and folded it once and put it in the drawer where I keep things I want to remember. Not as a record of grievance, as a record of a woman who almost forgot herself and then decided not to. I put on the kettle. I sat down at the table. Outside, the night was still and the roses were dark shapes in the yard, and the house was full of the particular silence that means everything that needed to be said has been said. I was still here. That was enough. That was everything.